Welcome back to Being Bookish. You must have known that we'd be back to fantasy sooner rather than later, and this week is that moment. I do really need to start reading a little bit faster and perhaps a few more genres. Truly, I really do. This week's review is of a relatively new release. In fact, it came out at the very end of March. And though it's been doing the ARC review round since June 2025, as someone who is now going to admit that she doesn't read a lot of e-ARCs over on NetGalley or ebooks in general anymore due to aging eyesight, it wasn't really on my radar until the beginning of this year. In fact, it wasn't on my radar until February because other things were taking up my brain space, and I talked about one of those things a couple of episodes ago. In this review, I'm going to be wondering how I can get back to my family in the real world, all the while also considering how I can use my knowledge of a fictional one to save the characters in my favourite unfinished fantasy book series. In Ilona Andrews' 2026 fantasy novel, This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me. I'm Ray, an unapologetic bookworm, introvert, self-confessed hermit, and a long-time depression sufferer. This is my quiet space to share thoughts as I make my way through an ever-growing and kind of intimidating now to-be-read pile. Join me as I explore the stories on my bookshelf, one book at a time, with 100% honest and completely spoiler-free reviews. Step into my bookish world and please, please enjoy your stay. When Maggie wakes up cold, filthy and naked in a gutter, it doesn't take her long to recognise Caer Torrin, a city she knows intimately from the pages of the famously unfinished dark fantasy series she's been obsessively reading and rereading while waiting years for the final novel. Her only tools for navigating this gritty world of rival warlords, magic and mayhem? Her encyclopaedic knowledge of the plot, the setting, and the characters' ambitions and fates. But while she quickly discovers she cannot be killed, though many will try, the same cannot be said for the living, breathing characters she's coming to love. A motley band that includes a former lady's maid, a deadly assassin, various outrageous magical creatures, and a dangerously appealing soldier. Soon, instead of trying to get home, she finds herself enmeshed in the schemes and attentions of dueling princes, dukes, and villains, all while trying to save them and the kingdom of Relis from the way she knows their stories will end, in a cataclysmic war. As with every single book I review, I am going to keep the detailed discussion and my personal opinion about the plot, characters, experiences, and some of the underlying themes to my review section at the end. And I am still going to maintain the whole honest and spoiler-free review plan because I really don't want to ruin everything for you. Maggie has loved Adrian Latour's The Rise of Caer Torrin series since she was a teen. But the final book hasn't been released, and this is a frustration, as any book fan will understand. She wrote reports on it at school, reread it so many times that she has an encyclopedic knowledge of the world and its characters, and keeps hoping for a release date for the last book. It's sort of a George R.R. Martin scenario. One morning, Maggie wakes up and nothing is as it was the night before. She's in the dirt, naked, soaked through, and the world is not the one she's familiar with. After a while, she recognises the world she has suddenly found herself in is Caer Torrin, the fictional city that is so much a part of her that she knows every single event, every street, and the stories behind all the characters. It takes 3 days of starving, shivering, and getting used to the fact that this is real rather than a dream she's going to wake from, for her to realise that she needs to do something if she's going to survive. Using her knowledge of the events in the book, having realised that when she arrived in Latour's world, she plots how she's going to survive long enough to get money for clothes and food. She's going to rob Lek, a fence who sells items stolen by murderers. She manages to get the money, though it costs her greatly. Her throat is slit and her life's blood draining from the wound. She plunges over a bridge into murky water, mourning what she is going to miss from her life in Austin, her friends, her family, her job, her life. When she wakes, no wound in her side or marks on her throat, still clutching the money bag she wrestled from Lex's hands, Maggie realises she survived without a mark. Is this her power? She's being kept company by a rather determined Stelka, a cross between a ragdoll and an otter, that she eventually manages to scare off. As she's walking through the streets of the town, wrapped only in rags, looking bedraggled, she encounters the fearful, sleepless Duke on his terrifying steed Villain. She does her best to hide, but he sees her and with a few words drops coins into her hand, then moves on. With these coins, wrapped in a sodden cloak, Maggie heads to the Garden of Soft Blossoms. She has secrets to share and is seeking safety. Once in the gardens, Maggie asks for serenity when given options for sanctuary and is gifted with food, simple clothes, and somewhere to rest. She is introduced to Gallienne of Sosna, a beautiful woman who offers Maggie a room for the night for the simple act of saying thank you to her maid. Later that evening, as she wanders through the gardens, she sees Ulmer Heben, and now I'm going to slaughter that name every single time you hear it, a cruel, violent, and politically ambitious man, a gilded toad, as he is described by a handsome stranger also observing. The next morning, feeling as though she cannot leave without offering something as thanks for a safe and peaceful night of sleep, Maggie warns Gallienne of the fate that is waiting for her, that she will anger Ulmer when she rejects him, enough that he will kidnap her daughter, force them both into a life of misery before killing her. As Maggie walks through the streets of the town, she sees evidence of Ulmer's cruelty and his desire for more power, and she's convinced that she is where she is because she can prevent what is to come from happening. Using her knowledge of the books to gain access to a bar run by the Shears, she encounters Solentine Dagara for the first time. He's curious to learn how she knows so much about them, and she shares information that they are seeking, gleaned from her many rereads of the books. One task down, one to go. She's off in search of Reynold Carris, a retired knight searching endlessly for his kidnapped son. She offers him hope, providing her theory on where his son could be. Her plan to find him is that she will be sold as a slave to the man responsible for Matteo's disappearance. For the first time, she introduces herself as Maggie the Undying. While in Derog's home, Maggie witnesses the sort of horrific violence that the book series is renowned for. The basement is home to several young children who are being held captive, including Caden and Clover. With Reynold's help, Maggie is able to get Clover, Caden, and the others free, though it's not without its price. Another throat slit, another death, and confirmation to Reynold that she has earned her name. With the slavers gone, Maggie and her motley crew make the house their base of operations. There are dark forces at play in the city, and she needs to prevent them from coming about. Murder is rife, and certain deaths will bring about the destruction of everyone's way of life. The night after the slaver's house is emptied of dead bodies, Maggie is visited again by Solentine, who is not only determined to solve the mystery of who she is, but also settle his debt, giving her the money she was promised. Realising that they need help in their endeavours, given the task they have is great, Reynold convinces Maggie to hire a family of mercenaries, Gort, Shana, Will and Lute Magnar. This family soon becomes part of the household, defenders loyal for coin. There is something there, though, which becomes apparent later in the story. The morning following the expansion of their household, Maggie wakes up with a fish on her chest, a pattern that continues for several days until she realises that the Selka she met upon arriving in Caertorin has found its way into her home and considers her its human. Naming it Sushi, Maggie accepts that even while she is missing her family back in Austin, wondering if she will ever see them again, these people are the family she's created while she's in the kingdom of Relis, however long that ends up being. While planning what they are going to do about the murders to come, Maggie, Reynold, and the others continue to make little changes that make a huge difference, including starting to make soap, a front to give her business dealings with others in the city some legitimacy. Now for the big plot, though not the complete reveal. Maggie knows that there are going to be several high-profile and tactical murders in the city. The goal for these murders, which were commissioned by Ulmar, is to obtain more power. The people to be killed are influential, and each death will deal a blow to the king's tenuous confidence in his people. Fearful for his own life, the murders will inspire the king to give Ulmar more power. It's a tactical power play that, without Maggie's interference, will pay off, ending in war. While Maggie, Clover, and Reynold are out shopping for provisions, they witness soldiers covering a body that was put on display by a murderer. Clearly, the victim had been tortured and defiled before death, and this discovery brings Maggie's own plans forward. Whatever the plot she was determined to prevent has already begun, and there is no time to waste. Knowing when the next body is going to be discovered, Maggie, Reynold, and the Magnars lie in wait for the murderer, leading to a discovery that shakes the roots of Maggie's beliefs. She knows that Reynold has no magical ability, yet when she witnesses him battling the murderer who has skills of his own, she knows he is not who she believed him to be. This man she has grown to care for is the one children are told tales of, someone she has briefly encountered before. This discovery changes absolutely everything, and if I went into more detail about the scheming, the potential romances, the revelations, I would be ruining the reading experience for everyone. And it's now time for the traditional being bookish public service announcement. I am not reviewing this book to influence you one way or the other. Please read what you want to. Pick up any book that sparks joy or takes your fancy when you're in a library or a bookshop. Reading should be fun, not a chore. DNF when you want to. Read what you love, and above everything else, this is not a competition. Whether you read 5 books in a year or 500, as long as you enjoy it, that is truly all that counts. Anyway, less of that. Let's see what others thought about This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me before I get to my own feelings on the book. Bailey listened to the audio of the book. As someone who can't do audio at all, I wonder if she'd have liked the physical book better. Anyway, she gave the book 1 star and said, "Thank you to Macmillan Audio, Tor Publishing, and NetGalley for the ARC in exchange for my honest review. This was a book that sounded great in theory to me. However, the execution was less than impressive. To be honest, I found it rather cringeworthy. This book relies too heavily on existing materials and forms of storytelling and was not strong enough to stand up on its own. Our main character Maggie lives in our world, but in classic Isekai anime style, she falls into a fantasy world upon her death. But not just any fantasy world, that of her favourite unfinished book series, which is just a Song of Ice and Fire. Given that she has read the series, she is familiar with the world and its plot, allowing her to anticipate what will happen next, most of the time. An interesting concept if I had not already read the webtoon Omniscient Reader. It also relies heavily on assuming you have a pre-existing knowledge of the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, as it pulls in multiple references and follows a similar plot line. You will also notice random direct lines from Game of Thrones or even The Lord of the Rings. And then there was the writing. This was some of the weakest storytelling I have yet to encounter. It might have made it onto a fanfiction website and lived to tell the tale, but it just felt so meta, self-insert. The plot kept going round and round and round and round, to the point that I felt I was reading the same thing repeatedly, and that is not even to mention the random, extremely hyper-specific modern-day references Maggie would make. I think my soul nearly left my body to seek greener pastures when she said, "Looking for a man in armour, 6'5", blue eyes." Please never do that to me again, I beg. I'm just going to leave it there. You get the point. I hope you like it more than I did. I never feel great leaving a negative review. Reading through the various one-star reviews on Goodreads, I found them fascinating. Often I will see the number of comments on a review and find that the majority are supportive of the reader and state a similar experience with the book. However, reading through the comments on many of these, I saw a very different pattern emerge. People were disappointed for the reviewer, stating that they'd experienced a very different read, and more often than not, they had enjoyed the book. There were only 27 one-star reviews, and several were written by readers who had DNF'd the book early on. Do we need to go into why I don't personally feel rating a book you have DNF'd is fair, or shall we just leave it there? Because I know I've stated my views several times on that particular matter. Anyway, a number of these reviews are less about the book and more about their expectations from the author, or from the type of novel they feel this was meant to be. Until reading the review above, I had no idea what Isekai actually was. However, I am well versed in the self-insert fan fiction, which I personally felt This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me was meant to be, at least initially. Also, as she listened to an earlier edition of the book, did the authors change the whole arrived in the world when she died in hers element? Or was this just something this reader had assumed? Because reading back, I can't see any mention of that in my copy. But then my copy is from when it was officially published rather than an arc. So maybe there is a difference between the two. The overall rating for This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me is relatively similar when I look across the various platforms, including Storygraph, Goodreads, and Fable. Oh, and more actually. There are so many reading platforms available now, and keeping up with them can be pretty time-consuming and a little bit stressful. How many do you record your reading on? I'm currently at 4. On Goodreads, it has a 4.69, and on Storygraph, it's at 4.58, a pretty good rating for a book that has been out for less than a month, though I do think that the fact it's been out with proofreaders and ARC readers since June last year may have impacted the score. Right now, the book has 4,944 ratings. That's actually doubled in the week since I started writing this script, and 1,552 full reviews on Goodreads. And on Storygraph, it has 954 ratings and 563 reviews. For any book, that's a pretty good rating to review ratio. Em loved this book so much that they read it twice. Once as an arc before release, and then on release day, enjoying the immersive experience of book and audio together. Upon first reading, they gave the book 5 incredibly enthusiastic stars, saying, "Okay, so this book was one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and I was terrified that it wouldn't live up to the hype I'd created in my head. I'm so glad that fear ended up being unfounded, because this was absolutely bleeping brilliant. As someone who has read a variety of Portal fantasy webtoons, I was so excited about the premise for this book. Like a modern-day woman falling into the world of her favourite dark fantasy series that the author never completed, giving George R.R. Martin and A Song of Ice and Fire tease. And facing the dilemma of whether or not to use her knowledge of the plot and characters to intervene to save the realm. How gloriously exciting. If comparing this to the Game of Thrones world, it was like asking myself if I would have saved Ned Stark from his death or prevented the Red Wedding. But of course, like any story dealing with time travel has taught us in the past, messing with the timeline always has consequences. The world building was exquisite, and even though at times it felt like there were massive info dumps, it made sense because that's how the fantasy series within this series was written. The books that Maggie loved had numerous POVs and side plots within side plots. Honestly, it's like A Song of Ice and Fire, so Maggie laying down a bunch of facts made sense. Also note that this world is truly a dark fantasy and doesn't shy away from touching upon all the gruesome and horrifically atrocious stuff humans can do. One of the things that Ilona Andrews truly excels at is how they write the mouth-watering tension and delicious slow burn between their main leads. The scene between Maggie and her potential man, no spoilers, had me kicking my feet and feeling giddy. Sorry to Curran and Mad Rogan, but I now have a new Ilona Andrews MMC fave. The found family aspect of this book was also one of my favourite things about it. I loved seeing Maggie find her people and truly build a home and family for herself in a world that wasn't her own. I swear everyone better get their happiest happily ever after or I'll riot. I cannot wait for the next book because that cliffhanger has me in a chokehold. I actually had to edit this particular review down just a little because this book has attracted, for all levels of ratings, the ever-popular meme attack. The reviews are extended, they are full of imagery, hilarious comments, and in some cases, massive spoilers. I do love reviews like this, but they don't really translate all that well into audio because I honestly don't think you want to hear me describing the GIFs for the next 20 minutes or more. Anyway, all of this to say that this novel by Ilona Andrews has inspired reviewers to unpack the memes, crack their knuckles, and write epic poetry to declare how much they enjoyed, or didn't, This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me. Right, now that I've mentioned what others are saying, here's what I really think about This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me by Ilona Andrews. No spoilers, just me being 100% honest. Did I like the book? I have to be honest here, as I said I would be. I had never heard of Ilona Andrews before I picked up this book, which is a strange admission for an eager fantasy reader to make. This husband and wife duo have written more than 40 novels and novellas over the course of their career, and there is an incredibly active Reddit board that is attracting new posts every single day. I looked at it for about 10 minutes and felt overwhelmed. I've always thought that this would be considered some sophisticated self-insert fanfiction style of storytelling. In fact, I've read a number of stories written by fanfic authors I love that use a similar plot device. I'm happy to say that I am incredibly wrong in this assumption. This particular style of story has its origins in Japanese manga and is called Isekai. And don't I feel daft, seriously, for not knowing that? I was having a conversation with a friend and told them and they were like, oh, didn't you know? It's like, no, I did not. So for those among you who are totally unaware of this specific genre, as I was, here is a little history. I actually really enjoyed researching it, to be honest, but then I am a research lover. I could sit and research and I go down rabbit holes pretty regularly. Simply translated from Japanese to English, Isekai is other world, different world, or another world. But it's so much more than that when you delve into it. At its core, Isekai is essentially the fish-out-of-water story taken to extremes. It's a subgenre of Japanese fantasy where regular people are suddenly plucked from their mundane lives and dropped into a completely different reality. Once they arrive, these characters usually find they've traded their average existence for incredible abilities or a destiny that makes them world-altering figures. This jump to another world usually happens in one of two ways. Either they die and are reborn, or they're magically summoned by a deity or a desperate kingdom in need of a hero. Most of these stories land the protagonist in a classic medieval setting filled with magic, knights, and monsters. However, the genre can also flip the script with reverse isekai, where a magical being or warrior ends up stranded here on Earth. While it feels modern, the roots of the genre actually stretch back to ancient Japanese folklore and classic Western portal fantasies. Perfect examples of this type of novel that most will be familiar with include The Wizard of Oz, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Before manga and other Japanese literature became more mainstream in the West, isekai was more commonly referred to as portal fantasy. So, there you have it. This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me is an isekai novel, and if you didn't have an idea of what that was before, like me, hopefully that helps. I had no idea, even though I have read multiple novels in the genre over the decades. You learn something new every single day, I guess. Not being familiar with Ilona Andrews' writing style or other books they've written, I went into this completely blind. And being honest, I wasn't expecting that much. Isn't that awful? The plot sounded a little like it had the potential to be fan fiction in published form, and while I love fan fiction, I haven't picked up many traditionally released novels that originated in that space. I was expecting Maggie to be a Mary Sue who was incredible at everything, never made any mistakes, or at least never admitted to them. She was going to be beautiful, perfect, and everyone was going to fall at her feet instantly. There were moments where it did feel like this was going to be the case. However, there were also incredibly human moments where she felt vulnerable, unprepared, and completely out of her depth. And we got to see those moments on the page. Love interests? There are a few. And initially, I was positive that Solentine was going to be at the very top of that list. Every man Maggie encounters, even the disgusting Ulmar, is described as being handsome or having interesting, attractive features. But that's where it stops. Maggie isn't admired or adored by any of the men she encounters in Caer Torin because of her looks. Her competence, her determination, and her kind nature are the things that attract men to her. And it's not exactly as though every single one of them is all over her like she's Bella in Twilight. I am still a little bit grossed out by the way the whole Jacob and Bella thing turned out. There is a certain amount of slow burn to Maggie's love story. And nope, I am not going to spoil it for you because I do not like spoilers, even though I occasionally have to force myself not to search for them. Most recently this week when I was waiting to watch the High Potential Season 2 finale, and oh boy, what an ending that was. There is so much I would love to talk about when it comes to this book, but to do so would just spoil not only massive and important twists, but also the cliffhanger ending. I don't feel that sharing the book, the first in a series, ends on a cliffhanger is exactly a spoiler. I'm just letting you know that you're going to be waiting on tenterhooks like the rest of us. Seriously, I want to know what happens next when you finish this book. Over the years, I have read a lot of fantasy. You only need to look at my bookcases to see that. And while most of them have been amazing, a few do come to mind where the world building was so disappointing, so weak, and in some cases almost absent. Given the way that this book was written, a reader being transported into the world of their favourite fantasy series, it's easy to assume that lazy world building would be a theme. But it's not. We get so much detail about the Kingdom of Relis, the geography, the history, the religious practices, because Maggie is such a fan of the work. At no point do the writers assume we're just going to accept how things are and the way that things are done. There were a couple of massive info dumps, as mentioned in the reviews, but they were done in such a way that I didn't feel they were unnecessary, which is so often the case in any genre. And they were used in a strange way, I suppose, as foreshadowing, future events being warned about or joked about that we then saw happen as the reader. Reading through parts of the book for a second time as I wrote down my thoughts for this episode, I found some of them ended up actually being rather funny because I then knew what was coming. This book, for me at least, was the perfect blend of world building and character-driven plot. Every character, from the barman to stall holders in the market and maids in the garden of soft blossoms, to the people who made up Maggie's found family, they all have a backstory and a reason to be in Maggie's line of sight, whether that's to help her achieve her goals or to carry the plot forward in a meaningful way. While there isn't exactly a cast of thousands, though there could be given the realm that we're working in, we are introduced to a lot of people who can make or break Maggie's plans. They can destroy her friends or help her to achieve her goals, whether that's by providing her with information, giving her a background that can't be disputed, or helping her to accomplish the goals she set out for herself. I have read so many books that do their best to achieve what this one has actually managed to do, with a strong female heroine who is out of her depth, knows it, and does her best to get better. Maggie doesn't come into this world immediately knowing what she's capable of. She learns what her abilities are at the same time as the reader does, and it could have all gone incredibly wrong in the process. I found myself wanting to know more about this kingdom that she found herself in, about the people, the history, and the books that Maggie loves so much. I wanted to know why she had such passion for them. I've read a few books where this is my love. I absolutely cannot not talk about it. And you will have seen me posting about them on social media. You will have heard me talking about them in my episodes, because these books are so important to me. They have impacted how I think about things, and they are books that I will recommend to everybody, and we'll get to those in a bit. This kingdom is not one filled with hearts and flowers. It has a terrifying past and an even more frightening future ahead of it. There is violence on the streets, war is looming, and there have been many horrific battles in the kingdom's past. The history that we're presented with is rich with dissension, 8 ruling families that all strive for far more power than they currently have. I know that I have mostly focused on Maggie because she is the central character. She is our Isekai. She is the woman who has been brought from this other world. And I believe now that the reason why the first reviewer in her 1-star review mentioned, oh, she died and found herself there, is because that is one of the options for a traditional Isekai character. But there are so many characters in this book with intense backgrounds. Solentine is initially skeptical of Maggie, especially given the knowledge she has of him and his past. But slowly he does warm to her. He's handsome, cynical, powerful, and careful. But when you've earned his loyalty, you know it. There is something intriguing about him and his reasons for helping Maggie as much as he does. And he really does go out of his way to do it. But there doesn't seem to be any physical attraction there. It's almost sibling-like. And I kind of imagine him saying, ugh, no thank you. I think it will take a while in this particular universe, but Solentine and his motives will not stay a mystery forever just for this book. Reynald is not who he appears to be. And if you've read the book, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. There's electricity between the knight and Maggie almost from the word go, which is unexpected for her because knowing this character as she does, she doesn't see him on the page as he is in person. She knows there is something about him which doesn't quite add up. He's got a secret, and the moment it's revealed, things start to go downhill. How can anyone trust someone who's been lying since the moment they met? That said, Reynald is strong, he's silent, sarcastic. At Maggie's side, he is loyal, enigmatic, overprotective, and a determined suitor who will accept no for an answer because we don't want somebody who will ignore a woman's wishes, but shows he is still interested. Maggie has indicated an interest in being more than friendly, and while she's rejected him because she's being a little bit cautious, she can't help but still show that she has feelings for him. The will they, won't they aspect between Maggie and Reynolds is a theme that flows through the entire book from the moment they meet. And while it's not the core theme of the story, because this is not a romantasy novel, it does have an important role to play because it's a vulnerability that can be taken advantage of. But then, to be fair, that is almost always the role that found family plays in a novel where peril builds up to the climax of the story. Caden and Clover are two characters who have very small roles to play in the novels that Maggie is familiar with, so they are somewhat unknown, unexpected quantities to her when she meets them for the first time. Caden is a 12-year-old boy on the cusp of being a teenager, perfect age, who was sold into slavery by the tailor he was apprenticed to. We learn more about his origins as the story continues, but he is the pesky little brother, the child who needs reassurance, security, and love from the people around him. He needs to feel useful, and we see this more as he grows more confident around Maggie and the others. Clover is another story entirely. At 17, she was a lady's maid, and she's experienced far more than any 17-year-old girl needs to. Her job required extensive training. She can sew, style a lady's hair, set a perfect table, and feed the people she cares for. Treated abominably in a previous household and then sold to a slaver, Clover has a great deal to offer and is more than a little bit perplexed by her new lady, Maggie, who is unlike any other she has encountered before. While Maggie knows Relis incredibly well because of her familiarity with the novels, there is still something missing, and this is even more apparent when she's forced into the role of Lady of the Manor. Independent and used to doing everything for herself, the conventions of the classes are a foreign world to her, and she requires the guidance of Reynolds and Clover to get through it all, because otherwise she wouldn't stand a hope. There is something of medieval England in the world that Maggie finds herself in, and this is what I absolutely love, the fact that you can almost feel it jumping off the page. Everything from the punishments and the class system to the ruling families in their regions screams of the barons and the earls that were so important in this period of English history. The book is so cleverly written and immersive that while I personally really would not want to wake up in this particular world, I feel that it was crafted in a way that makes you almost desperate to read more. Every character, every backstory, every incident that occurs has purpose. There are no superfluous plot points that lead nowhere. There are several red herrings, moments of deception that frustrate, but they have an important role to play. Even the moments where Maggie gives us, the readers, an info dump in disguise have a good reason to be there. I really wasn't sure what I was going to get when I was going into this novel, though I was positive it was going to be 100% Mary Sue ridden and a book I wouldn't think about again. A book like this needs effective world building to get investment from the reader, and I've been let down so many times by books that just haven't quite got there. This book was everything I wanted and everything I hoped it would be. I finished it wondering when the next one was going to be released, and have also now added a few Ilona Andrews fantasy novels to my wish list for later purchase. Overall, this was well written, interesting, and fun. There were dark moments, events that led to a potentially horrifying outcome, and seriously, that cliffhanger is everything. If you enjoyed This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me, or you want to read something similar, please try these. I'm not overly familiar with more modern isekai or portal fantasy novels, so I can't really list them here. However, if you are looking for some incredibly written high fantasy, whatever people are saying this is not romantasy, then I have got you covered. The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. This one is released in paperback at the end of April, earlier than was originally planned. It was initially meant to be released in December this year. And if you pick up, honestly, one high fantasy this year, this one has to be it. Everything about the Raven Scholar was and is incredible. Honestly, the only reason I have kept my regular Illumicrate subscription is because they mentioned they may be bringing out a special edition of the second book. Though when that is due out is anyone's guess at the moment. I am still waiting for that announcement. Probably the most well-known high fantasy series is The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. Though I have a copy on my shelf, I replaced the one that my uncle gave me when I was 10 because it had fallen apart. I haven't actually read the book since 1985. It was a summer read, mostly because my uncle was fed up with me telling him I was bored. It's probably time for me to revisit Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn, and Samwise. So maybe this summer I should take a journey back to Middle-earth, because it has been a very long time. It's 41 years now? God, that's kind of scary. Though I struggled personally with the writing style, I do know that many love the Game of Thrones series. In fact, it was mentioned by both the 1-star and 5-star reviews. It spawned award-winning TV series and inspired many to name their children Daenerys, as well as reigniting a fantasy fascination for dragons. I think that we may have Game of Thrones to thank for Fourth Wing. If you love chunky books with in-depth family trees, questionable love interest options, and lots of political rivalry, then this series, though unfinished, kind of like the series in This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me, it could be exactly what you're looking for. The list I currently have on my notepad is pretty extensive, with authors from Philip Roth and Brandon Sanderson to Robin Hobb, but I could talk about them for ages and still not be done. So I'm going to leave it with those three, and let me know if you feel I have forgotten someone, because I am 100% sure I did. I haven't listed every single author I could have done. It's already April, the evenings are brighter, the sun has been shining finally in the UK for the last week, and though today started out grey, I've now got beautiful blue skies and I'm going to enjoy my supper on the balcony. It's amazing how good just a couple of hours of being outside can make you feel. It really is. In fact, I don't think there's anything else quite like it. When I was a teen, I used to dream of the days when I had a flat of my own and a balcony where I could pretend I was sophisticated enough to enjoy drinking a coffee while sitting at a small bistro table. Oh, how the times have changed. It only took 30 years to get to this point, but I have finally got my balcony, but I don't have a bistro table anymore. It was so impractical. My reading has been so much slower this month that even though it's already the 11th, I am only on book 2. The most important thing I am taking from this experience, though, is that I am enjoying the pace at which I'm consuming literature right now. By this time last year, I'd already read 40 books and 15,200 pages. This year, I am enjoying book 34, and I've consumed 14,300 pages. So while the book count is pretty low in comparison, well, I'd say not pretty low, it's lower than the same time last year. The page count, especially once I finish my current 800-page read, will be incredibly close. I'm putting the blame for this solely at the feet of Matt Dinnerman, and I'm sure he can take it. I am less than 100 pages from the end of book 6 in his Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and I am dreading the moment when I am completely caught up. With the penultimate book due for release next month, the time is going to soon be upon me, and I'm going to very much miss Princess Donut and Carl. I was going to save this book for an extended review later on in the year, but as my Mindsight subscription from Illumicrate has just arrived, that will probably be a novel I want to talk about in a few weeks. If it's what I think it is, because I haven't opened the box yet. It arrived when I was writing my script, so that's my excuse. What happens when you discover you're to be the beneficiary in the will of a great aunt you've never met, only to find her dead body when you visit her house? That's exactly what happens to Annie Adams in Kristen Perrin's How to Solve Your Own Murder. Ever since the day a fortune teller told Frances Adams that she was going to be murdered, she's been obsessed with learning everything about everyone in her life. Every dirty little secret, every part of their family history, every thought they've ever had that could pertain to her potential death. It was a bit of a joke to the people of Castle Knoll, though the knowledge that she had a file on every single villager wasn't exactly a comfort. Brought up by her artist mother in London, Annie Adams never met Frances. But when she's named in her will, she heads down to the Cornish village her mother ran from when she was a teenager. Intrigued as to why she'd been mentioned in the will and her mother had been passed over, Annie heads to meet this wealthy great aunt, only to discover she's too late. Frances is dead, and though it initially appears to be from natural causes, the fact that the paranoid woman lived her life fearful of the prophecy she was given at 16 gives everyone pause. Her suspicions were founded in truth, however, and when it's announced that Frances was murdered and whoever solves the murder will inherit everything in Frances's extensive estate, things start to get a little bit nasty. For Annie, while the promise of a large house and the money which goes with it is a nice thought, her key concern is ensuring her mother doesn't lose the home that Frances provided for them in London. As part of the estate, ownership will revert to whoever solves the murder, and with a property developer and Frances's husband's nephew chomping at the bit to get everything, she has to do something, even if that puts her in danger. What seems to be a really simple task is not at all. As Annie learns more about Frances and the role she played in Castle Knoll, she realises that there are so many suspects. Everyone has a motive. The files are a source of information and concern. The information contained within them could tear apart marriages, reveal secrets that people aren't ready for, and possibly uncover the mystery of what happened to one of Frances's best friends, Emily, who disappeared in the mid-1960s. Personally, I love a good cozy mystery, as you'll know if you've been here for a while. I was drawn in by the cover, which has a very Agatha Christie feel to it. The story is told using a dual storyline and a dual timeline, 1965 and present day. While searching Frances's rooms, Annie finds a set of detailed diaries that tell the story of everything that happened after Frances received that fortune that changed her life. As Annie is investigating the murder, she's also learning of the events leading up to the disappearance of Emily. Initially, it felt personally unclear to me as why this was important. How could something which happened so long ago have any bearing on what Annie discovered? This truly doesn't become clear until much later in the book, but the revelation is one that could change everything and certainly alters Annie's perspective on what is going on in Castle Knoll. The book starts off with a gentle hum and finishes with a massive punch to the gut, which I'm kind of relieved about because that whole gentle thing was very nice to begin with, but I wanted some action. And we get it. We have drug smuggling, another attempted murder, infidelity, and a surprising outcome that I really did not see coming. I like books that make me think and ones that provide me with an ending I never could have predicted. That said, while completely out of the blue, when I started to think about the red herrings that have been sort of dropped into the story every once in a while when it came to certain people being seen or certain things being said, the twisted dual timelines and the way that certain things happened, the power of hindsight made me realise that the information to to discover the murderer had been there all along if I'd been paying better attention. That really will show me, honestly. Definitely did for the next book. There are currently 2 books in the series, and the third, How to Cheat Your Own Death, is released in hardback at the end of April. If you like small town mystery, enjoy dual timelines, and protagonists who are outside of their comfort zone, this book could definitely be one for you. In fact, if you like cozy mysteries and enjoy Agatha Christie, I would 100% recommend that you pick this book up, because I enjoyed it far more than I expected to. Well, that's it for this week, and thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show, why not share it with your friends or family and leave a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. In fact, you can now leave comments on Spotify, and I love to read what you think, what you're thinking, or if you've got an opinion or there's a book you want me to read or talk about, because I'm always open to suggestions, and it really does help the algorithm, people finding me. It's fantastic. Honestly, it really is. And thank you for listening to me for the last 5 and a bit years. You can find me on Instagram at beingbookishpod, on X at being_bookish, and on TikTok at beingbookishreviews. If you prefer to read your reviews, or you want to learn more about where you can find the podcast, head over to beingbookish.co.uk for my spoiler-free reviews, my 2026 reading tracker, and all the links to everywhere you can find Being Bookish in one place. Until next time, this is me saying farewell.